Looks like we had an emotional British GP. I saw someone comment that Charles Leclerc probably was the only driver who ended up being happy in that entire weekend. How did Ferrari bounce back after the lack of power in Austria? How did Charles Leclerc bounce back? How did Ferrari manage to lose a 1-2 podium finish? Was it their fault? What is happening to Max Verstappen? Is his relationship with Red Bull under threat? Was the last lap of the British GP the biggest disappointment of the season so far? And was the decisions made by the stewards right? Let's talk about all of it. This is the 2026 British GP weekend review. British GP has always been one of those iconic races we all look forward to, almost always right in the middle of the season, and it almost always does something significant for the championship as well. Last year, British GP was a lot of people's first Formula One race, watching it live after the F1 movie released. We had Max Verstappen spin out of the race as well, and a very handsome, wholesome Hulkenberg got his first podium. We also had the iconic Max versus Lewis crash in 2021. We also had Lewis finishing in 3 tires in 2020. If anything, this year's British GP's last lap was the exact opposite of what happened in the last lap of 2020. But I do want to start today by talking about Charles Leclerc. I'm telling you, Charles Leclerc has been definitely visiting a therapist, because since when does Charles Leclerc start making meme quotes? Tough times never last, only tough people last. I think his therapist is showing him memes in the name of therapy and is earning a lot. Jokes aside, the performance in Silverstone has answered so many questions that people had about him and Ferrari. And before we talk about Ferrari's pace, I do want to talk about what Lewis Hamilton said in the press. So he was very appreciative of Charles. So at the beginning of the week, they ran a simulator setup, but it looked very uncomfortable for Lewis Hamilton. So Lewis went ahead with his gut feel as usual. But Charles Leclerc for that sprint weekend used that setup and didn't do that well. So for the main qualifying and the race, Charles Leclerc also changed his setup to match Lewis's recommendation and went with a more gut feel than the simulator, what simulator pointed to. And then Charles Leclerc also ends up out-qualifying Lewis by almost 0.2 seconds. Charles out-qualifying Lewis was not a big deal last year, but this year it definitely feels like Charles Leclerc had out-qualified an in-form and an in-prime Lewis Hamilton. And that too, out-qualifying him in a Silverstone circuit in British GP is a huge deal. So definitely a big up for Charles. But I was wondering where Ferrari got their pace from. So we got some more information about the car setup. Apparently, they sacrificed a bit of one-lap speed to ensure that they had better race pace. Now, there has been plenty of instances where the Ferraris were really quick off the track, and sometimes, yes, the Mercedes in general were slow off the track, but sometimes it was just a driver error. One driver was slow and then Ferrari go ahead and take the lead. But over the race pace, the Mercedes cars almost always seem to have the better race pace, with the exception of Barcelona. And even that, I want to add a caveat, Kimi Antonelli was definitely fast in Barcelona as well before his DNF ruined his race. So definitely this decision to sacrifice one lap speed to make sure that they had race pace paid off, because Charles Leclerc overtook Kimi Antonelli and Kimi had to stick to a different kind of a strategy to make his car work and eventually challenge for P1. Now here's the fun bit. When you say that they've sacrificed a bit of one lap speed, they still managed to get P2 and P3 in qualifying. So I don't know how you will want to take this result, but definitely Silverstone had given Ferrari some extra boost. As far as the power unit is concerned, Ferrari also brought a new software update for this ADUO power unit, the new update that they brought from Austria. And to be honest, that PU looked disappointing in Austria, but for this weekend they had definitely tweaked the software update a bit, and they also made the deployment of the engine a lot more aggressive and effective. And the best part about Ferrari PU is that it is actually reliable. So the two Ferrari drivers definitely deserved the spots on the podium. I will go as to say that they even deserved a 1-2, but yes, we will get to that safety car debacle in a bit. But this weekend, just like in Barcelona, we are leaving with a lot of hope and confidence that what happened in Barcelona was not a one-off thing, but Ferrari this year, they are here to compete and they are here to challenge for the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship. I also want to talk about what happened with Mercedes. Let's start by saying clearly Kimi is the better driver of the two Mercedes drivers. Am I the only one saying that? Probably not. George Russell fans probably will disagree with me, but that's what George seems to think as well. Today was another one of his does nothing gets P2 moment where he was chasing Lewis and Max from P5, gets a puncture, gets an additional pit stop, effectively taking him out of the podium contention, and suddenly the safety car comes out and we have George in P2 all of a sudden. George himself mentioned that he didn't feel like he earned that P2. Toto is saying that they are not going to be champions if they end up doing this week over week. Both Mercedes cars had faults this race and both of them were not PU related issues as well. I do want to take a moment and talk about Kimi properly. In our qualifying live stream, the topic of Kimi came up and we had this conversation that tough times never came for Kimi. He was in a good car last year. He was in a car that was considered one of the top 3 or top 4. And this year he has gotten a rocket ship. So he has never been through tough times. And I do agree that he has not seen a lot of life experiences, let's put it that way. But the attitude that Kimi showed this entire race, especially when his race was falling apart, was commendable. He kept going even though he had a penalty and his engineer asked him to retire the car. He wanted to give his everything to get at least 1 point, and that is some insane mentality to expect from a 19-year-old. Let's not forget that. But what truly broke my heart was the penalty. When it comes to track limits, especially when the car has some issues, the stewards are a bit more lenient. But again, last year when the same thing or similar thing happened to Lewis Hamilton in Singapore, when he lost brakes and he was cutting corners just to avoid crashing, he was given a 5-second penalty later. So the penalty was definitely coming and I found it harsh. And of all the days, today was the one day the stewards decided to follow every rule in the book by the book. So what happened to Kimi? It was a suspension damage that was not visible at first, and then they did a pit stop to check. That issue continued, so he had to be pitted again to fix the issue. He went from a 1-stop race to a 3-stop race. He had such a long 35-lap stint on medium tires and genuinely was in contention for P1. From Kimi's feel and point of view, there was something deep and broken in the car than the suspension, because he was losing aerodynamic performance as well as grip, and throughout the track he mentioned he couldn't even drive straight. So yeah, unlucky for Kimi. He did score some really good points in the sprint weekend by coming first, but this is yet another race where Kimi gets 0 points and George Russell gets a huge chunk of points, and all the advantages that Kimi had built over the first 6 races are almost fully out. George is just 25 points away from Kimi right now. Speaking of George, he also had a slow puncture that is also very strange. That was very reminiscent of his 2020 Shakir GP, where he got a slow puncture that took him out of the podium. But this time that somehow got him back onto the podium. Probably the least celebrated podium of Mercedes, because neither George or Toto was happy. Again, speaking of unhappiness, Max had one hell of a weekend and not the enjoyable kind at all. Let's start from the practice session and the sprint race. Max kept complaining about this one issue that he kept getting while downshifting in the engine. Qualified P3 in the sprint, but he kept complaining that there was something significantly wrong with the PU. Those issues ran through the sprint race and Max was nowhere in the sprint, and he fell off massively from a podium at the sprint race. So Max tries a new setup for their main qualifying and the race, but looks like the power unit has been its Achilles heel. He gets out qualified by Hadjar, and this time he is in P7, and now he requests the team to change the power unit and do a pit lane start, just like Interlagos last year, where he started from the last in the pit lane and he went on to be in the podium. Maybe, see, when it comes to Max Verstappen, all of these kind of things are possible, but the team did not listen to him. Today he started at P7 with the same faulty PU and somehow managed to climb his way up to P3, and all the way crying about the downshifts, crying about how bad the car is. And then the same wing closing issue that made him spin in Austria happened, and very similar circumstances, he ends up spinning and crashing out, this time from the race, especially after almost 90% of the race was done. Yes, obviously for Max Verstappen this is a bad result and he is no longer in the drivers' championship contention effectively, because his season has been so poor. But there is a lot more behind the scenes issues that are brewing at Red Bull, and I want to talk about a couple of them. Firstly, now with the British Grand Prix result, Max cannot mathematically be P2 in the championship by summer break, which means he can look outside of Red Bull legally for a move for next year. Red Bull had tried to persuade him so much to remove that clause from the contract, but it did not happen. And I don't think Max is in any mood, or Max's team is in any hurry to remove that clause after what has happened. Sources also have confirmed that Max Verstappen's team is definitely going to hold on to that clause. The second more interesting thing that is brewing is the technical lead, Pierre Waché. I think he is leading the technology side of things at Red Bull, and he is apparently not sharing all the data with GP. Now GP is Max's race engineer, and GP is expected to leave Red Bull and join McLaren soon. And since McLarens are rivals, they are very hesitant to share data with GP. Now for Max, this is a really tough place to be in. Firstly, the team is not giving him enough data. Secondly, the team is not listening to him when it comes to changes and recommendations to setups. Even if Max did not crash and went on to get the podium, he mentioned in the interview he would not have been happy because he got it because of Kimi's issues. He also had Lewis serve a penalty of 5 seconds, and the timing of VSC helped him. So he definitely feels he did not earn that spot on the podium even if he finished the race anyway. So the weekend is crucial in Max and Red Bull's direction in the championship and their future relationship as well. We will know definitely a lot more about all of these conversations from sources through the week, so I will keep you all posted. But as it stands, there is a lot of tension in the Red Bull garage. Okay, now let's talk about the safety car that came after Max's crash. Max's car was properly stuck in the gravel. Yes, this needs a safety car because the crane was out and the crane was needed to lift the car into safety. Now when the safety car came out, my first reaction was that the race was going to end under the safety car, because that's what I put on my Instagram story the minute it happened. But I also saw every team was pitting, because it was a good thing to do strategy wise, because you are hedging your bets just in case if there was a last lap where there is a 1 lap shootout, you had fresh soft tires that you can put on the car. And every team pitted every one of their drivers except for Mercedes. Why did Mercedes gamble and stay out? Because they had a miserable weekend anyway, and staying out was an all or nothing move. So for Russell, he would get P2 if this safety car doesn't end, and for Kimi it would still be P10 and they could still potentially argue with the stewards about the penalty if possible. But if the safety car had ended up 1 lap earlier, yes, then Russell will be stuck in the last lap with old tires, whereas everybody else around him would be in new, fresher, soft tires. But for Kimi, this was the exact same thing, but at least Kimi was in the midfield at P10, so he can still manage to hold off some of the cars because Mercedes cars definitely had a better pace. But what was disappointing was that the safety car never ended, and we all got the message because of a software error. So apparently the message for safety car in happened immediately moments after Charles Leclerc had crossed the start line, so which meant they had to do 1 full lap, and only the next lap the safety car was supposed to have come in. So they were following the rules, but in the telecast side of things, there was a software error that mentioned safety car in 1 lap early. FIA officially have come out and clarified that, but now the biggest loser in all of this has been Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari. Why? Because they lost P2 because of it. The error message was acknowledged, the rules were followed correctly. Now this controversy was bound to bring up the Abu Dhabi 2021 result. There was so much chatter online about how the FIA is biased against Lewis Hamilton, how Michael Massey is suddenly back and now the season is scripted against Lewis Hamilton, and there was some tasteful abuses as well thrown at the FIA. Let me just say this, okay? Lewis was screwed over in 2021. What happened in the British GP in 2026 has nothing to do with 2021. 2021 was a human error. When I say error, I am giving it a lot of liberty in the use of that word. It was a decision made by a human. This time it was a software error, and the humans overrode that error and did the right thing. Toto himself had later added, even though in the midst of all of this miserable weekend, he added that he was happy that the rules are being followed. So yeah, I wanted to state things as they are because I legit kept seeing so many comments about this full of emotion and mostly inaccurate. And one of the most common questions that keep bringing up Max versus Lewis, or Lewis whenever the topic of Lewis comes in, is the unfair treatment at 2021, right? Everyone acknowledges, nobody ever says that 2021 was a unrigged race, right? It was rigged not because of a driver, but because of a spectacle that they wanted to see happen in the last lap. Michael Massey, he is no longer in the official business of doing things, and this is definitely not the repeat of 2021. It's just a sad reality and sad coincidence that Hamilton had to be the recipient of that disappointment from P2 to P3. You know what else is sad? My predictions for the weekend. If you are following along with me through the weekend, you know what my predictions were. I'll give you a quick recap, but you're gonna see why I am really sad. Firstly, in the sprint, I predicted McLaren's pole position, jinxed it, even though they ended up on the podium in the race. Yeah, massive jinx that was. McLaren were nowhere. Now, second prediction in the sprint was that there was going to be a safety car in the sprint race. Yeah, we had a safety car in the main race, but sprint, it didn't happen. It didn't cause any chaos, so wrong again. And now race prediction, I said Lewis Hamilton on pole. P3 not too far off, but yeah, it is not pole position. Wrong again. Max Verstappen on podium was the next prediction. Yeah, jinxed the crap out of this. Haas in the top 10, even after all of this chaos, even after so many people climbing up so many paces, Haas wasn't in the top 10. I don't know how to unjinx myself at this point, because anything and everything that I have said, the opposite ends up happening. And here is the biggest, the most easiest prediction that I made, which is 6 cars will be out of the race by the end of the race. There was someone who mentioned in the comment in that previous prediction video that that is probably the easiest prediction because it was definitely going to happen. Can you believe that in the British GP of all races, both Astons and both Cadillacs finished? Yeah, that was the level at which I had jinxed this entire weekend. 0 out of 6 correct. Great weekend for me. As I mentioned on my IG, I was sick through the weekend and I have fever and cold and cough. So I was taking it slow. Couldn't come out on YouTube live to watch the race together with all of you. I will try to get better and be back with another video that would be on the Q&A and the moments you may have missed. Alright folks, that's it for today. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for staying subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe and keep a lookout for the next few videos, okay? Peace.